What's up guys, today we are talking about the 6-0 Ruby, which has caught significant amounts of attention recently, and make sure you stay tuned to the end because I'm going to tell you why I think Kevlar has become a buzzword that it hasn't necessarily earned yet. The Ruby can be purchased for $199, but with discount code PBStudio, you can bring that down to $180. The Ruby shares a lot of specs with the double black diamond. In fact, everything is the same except for the face material and higher swing weight. It's a 16mm polymer core, thermoformed, hybrid shape of 16.3 inches in length, Kevlar face, average weight of 8.3 ounces, swing weight of 118, and twist weight of 6.68. The grip circumference is listed as 4 1/8 inch up to 4 1/4, which is a bit strange since 6-0 has not listed it this way in the past, but mine personally came in at 4.25 inches. Finally, 6-0 recently updated their warranty to 12 months for defects and 6 months for core materials such as core crushing. This is up from the previous 6 months for defects and 3 months for the core material, so it's a nice addition to see them upping the warranty, which is not something you see all that often from companies. Throughout this review, I'm going to be comparing the Ruby to 2 other paddles that I think you guys will be most curious to know how they compare. That's the 6-0 Double Black Diamond and the Pickleball Apes Proline Energy S. The Double Black Diamond is all carbon fiber, while the Proline Energy S is a blend of carbon fiber and Kevlar. I think you guys will find that there are a lot of similarities with subtle differences between these 3 paddles. First, let's compare the spin of these paddles. From most to least, we have the Ruby in first with 2091 RPM, the Double Black Diamond at 2018 RPM, and the Proline Energy S at 1740 RPM. The one thing I do want to point out here is that my Proline Energy paddles have all had substantially lower RPMs than every other reviewer on the market. So I don't know if mine were just a dud and got lower grit or what the case is, but based on the evidence from all the other reviewers, it's probably fair to say that the Proline Energy S is much closer to the other paddles than my personal numbers might suggest. Now, I want to point out that the Ruby and Double Black Diamond have a difference of 73 RPM. I have seen a lot of talk about how the Ruby gets so much more spin than other 6-0 paddles, and I've not thought this once during my testing so far. And the numbers back that claim up. The Ruby gets fantastic spin, but so does the Double Black Diamond. So in this category, the Ruby wins, but it's not by a margin that I think is even noticeable to anyone, and effectively in the real world, I would call this a tie. When it came to what had the most to least control, I would say it was the Proline Energy S in first, the Double Black Diamond in second, and then the Ruby. The Proline Energy S has this very plush feel that makes controlling the ball on resets, blocks, and dinks extremely easy. It reminds me a lot of control paddles and how the ball feels off the face. I personally felt it had noticeably more control than the other paddles that it's being compared to. Now, between the Double Black Diamond and the Ruby, the difference was much more subtle. I did many sessions with all 3 paddles, and I would rotate them back to back for hand battles, dinking, mid-court resets, drops, skinny singles, anything you can name, I probably tried it. And between the Ruby and Double Black Diamond, it was very hard to pick a clear winner. In fact, the biggest difference I could point out between the 2 is that the Ruby has a slightly more plush feel off the face, and the Double Black Diamond is more stiff. If you put them on a scale from least stiff to most stiff, it would be the Proline Energy S, the Ruby, and then the Double Black Diamond. In the end, the Ruby and Double Black Diamond are very similar in control. Initially, when I got the Ruby, the area that I noticed being slightly more difficult than usual were mid-court resets and third shot drops. They were just a little bit higher than what I was expecting, but within a play session or 2, this stopped being an issue. If you're already used to thermoformed paddles, I don't believe that controlling the Ruby will be that much of an issue for you. If you're coming from a Gen 1 raw carbon fiber paddle or something that is known to be a pure control paddle, then you might have a little bit more of an issue. For pop, I think that the Double Black Diamond and Ruby are quite similar again. In fact, nailing down a winner for my testing is not easy. But I'm going to rank it with the Double Black Diamond having the most pop, followed by the Ruby, then the Proline Energy S with the least. With the stiffer nature of the Double Black Diamond, you get just a bit more pop off the face than you do with the Ruby, which feels more plush overall. If you aren't familiar, pop refers to when you hold your paddle still and don't do anything. how much does the ball travel afterward? The shots that these relate to the most would be blocks, resets, and counters. The Proline Energy S has the least amount of pop, which means that for resets and blocks, it's easier to use when compared to the Ruby and Double Black Diamond. The trade-off is that in hand battles, it's a little bit harder to counter with. From most to least powerful, we have the Ruby, Double Black Diamond, and then the Proline Energy S. And at this point, you guys are probably spotting a trend in how these paddles stack up. And yet again, I'm going to say that the difference between the Ruby and the Double Black Diamond power levels is fairly subtle. But I do believe that on drives and overheads, I have more power than I do on the Double Black Diamond. However, what I want to point out is that on average, the Ruby has a higher swing weight and higher stock weight than the Double Black Diamond does, which could easily contribute to these differences. I've seen several Rubies in my Discord that are in the 8.4 to 8.6 ounce range, while most Double Black Diamonds I've seen weigh around 8.1 to 8.3 ounces. The swing weight of both my Rubies were 118 and 119, whereas the Double Black Diamond on average is 114. A 5-point difference is something that most players will be able to notice, and I think that's contributing to more plow through on the Ruby, which is leading to more power on those big swings. The Ruby and Double Black Diamond do not have substantially different power levels. I would personally categorize both as an all-court paddle, with the Ruby being on the more powerful end of the spectrum of all-court. Lastly, the Proline Energy S feels like it has reasonable power, but I did feel like I had to swing a touch harder to get the same speed as the other two paddles. When it came to hand speed, I would put the Double Black Diamond as the fastest, followed by the Proline Energy S, and then the Ruby being the slowest. However, as almost every category has gone so far, the difference between the Proline Energy S and the Ruby is extremely subtle. In fact, I would rather call this a tie because I really don't see a big difference between these two. Now, the Double Black Diamond, compared to the other two, I do think is faster enough in the hand to be noticeable, but not a big deal breaker. When I would use the other two, I could tell it required more effort to swing, but it wasn't enough for me to not like using either paddle. I would only give you caution if you know that the Double Black Diamond is at your upper limit of swing weight and you don't want to cross that line. With the Ruby having a higher than average stock weight, I think some people might not appreciate that. But for myself, it wasn't a big deal. Sweet spot, I'm going to give a draw across the board. All three of these paddles have excellent sweet spots that I don't think too many players will have complaints with. I truly think you're splitting extremely thin hairs to try and find which one of these might be better. The biggest thing I found was that the Ruby felt marginally more solid around the entire paddle. And this is probably due to having a slightly higher twist weight and higher overall stock weight compared to the Double Black Diamond. It could also be the Kevlar playing a small role in how the ball feels being hit in certain areas. If you want to go strictly based off of twist weights, the order from best to worst would go Ruby at 6.68, Double Black Diamond at 6.54, and the Proline Energy S at 6.34. Even within the twist weight numbers, you can see the differences are not very large, and I think that's why it's hard to pick a winner here, because they're all just really similar. When it came to lead tape, I actually opted not to add any lead tape to my Ruby because it already felt solid and stable, and I just didn't want to increase the swing weight any further. Personally, this is one of the few paddles that I've used in recent times that I didn't feel needed lead to be improved, which is nice to see. However, if you're able to swing a heavier paddle with no issue, adding some lead above the bottom corners could be a great spot to try. All right, now that we've gone over comparing all three of these paddles in the different categories, I want to just talk about Kevlar for a second, because I've been a bit confused by the general reaction to it as a material in pickleball. There's been a lot of buzz as if Kevlar is some magic material that has suddenly made pickleball paddles a lot better. In my opinion, that's just not the case. I think people are getting excited because it's a new material that has played reasonably well in some new paddles, but by no means is it a game changer. Some of the claims on the 6-0 website regarding Kevlar are: the face material has a unique combination of high strength, high modulus toughness, and thermal stability. It has high impact resistance and is durable, abrasion resistant, meaning the paddle surface will last a long time and will be more resistant to wear compared to existing carbon fiber faced paddles. The only line that I'm skeptical of is that this will last longer than carbon fiber surfaced paddles. The Ruby is still using the same type of peel ply texture on top of the Kevlar surface that raw carbon fiber paddles use, and in my opinion, the Kevlar would have little to nothing to do with how durable that peel ply texture is. If you look under a microscope, you'll see the same type of pattern that you see on many raw carbon fiber paddles. It's just harder to see with the naked eye because you're seeing the 3K weave beneath the peel ply. A handful of people in my Discord server mentioned that they felt in the first week of using the Ruby that it was smoother in the center than it was in the edges. 60 is using their updated texture that they used on the Black Diamond on the Ruby. This peel ply texture is more coarse and rough to the touch. If you compare them under a microscope, you can see that the double Black Diamond texture is a tighter pattern while the Ruby is not as tight. My Ruby also felt a bit smoother in the center after all my testing, but if you look under the microscope, there's no damage to the texture at all. So while it may feel a bit smoother to the touch, my guess is that you're just wearing off a small top layer of texture and there's no significant damage to the rest of it. I do believe that Kevlar gives paddles a mildly different feel than carbon fiber does, and in some cases that may be more appealing to a certain individual. But we're not talking a substantial change in how the paddle feels. Spin is not substantially better, the feel is not drastically changed, it hasn't made paddles significantly lighter, it's just small advancements, which I think is perfectly fine. But I think people should understand that before we create a lot of buzz around this material. Kevlar did not create a big leap in performance like carbon fiber did from fiberglass or thermoforming did from the original cold mold paddles that were being made. It's a subtle upgrade that in some contexts could be marginally better. And with that being said, you're going to see a ton of Kevlar flood the market because I already know of at least 4 to 5 companies working on Kevlar for their own paddles, so be prepared for this to be the next wave of technology. Now, one common question I have seen a lot since the Ruby has come out is that, are you able to use a rubber eraser on a Kevlar paddle? And the answer should be yes, because it's using the same type of peel ply texture that's on top of a raw carbon fiber paddle. And in fact, I have already used a carbon eraser on my Ruby a few times and have not seen any difference to the paddle. Okay, now that you've heard all of my comparisons between the paddles, what are my final thoughts on the Ruby? I think the Ruby is a fantastic paddle. In fact, it has almost no big drawbacks. The biggest one is going to be the higher stock weight that not everyone will appreciate. It has good control at the kitchen line, it has good power at the baseline, and enough pop to not be a big complaint unless you're coming from paddles like the Gearbox Pro Power, Pro Kenix Black Ace, or Power Air. But what I'm going to say is that if you already own a double Black Diamond, I really don't know that there's enough performance change in the Ruby for me to suggest that you go and buy it. If you're familiar with older iPhones, Apple used to do an S version of their phone every other year. So you would have the iPhone 6, then next year you would have the iPhone 6S. The S models were meant to be smaller upgrades. So this meant that if you owned the iPhone 6, you didn't need to rush out and go buy the S. However, if you were coming from an iPhone 5 or 5S, the 6S was likely a big enough upgrade to be worth considering. And that's exactly how I view the Ruby with the double Black Diamond. It feels like a small iteration of an already great paddle. So if you own a double Black Diamond and are happy with it, I don't think you need to feel the pressure to go and buy the Ruby. The Ruby is not a game changer of a paddle. However, it's a very nice iteration of a paddle that was already extremely popular on the market. The double Black Diamond has been my favorite paddle for the majority of the year, so if you can improve upon that slightly, it's a net positive. My final recommendation is that the Proline Energy S is for those that want an all-court paddle that leans towards control and has quite a plush feel. This would be better for players that lean more toward a control style of game. The double Black Diamond is square in the middle of an all-court paddle with a stiff feel. It really is one of the most all-around paddles that you can buy on the market without any significant weakness, and I think that's part of the reason it has become so popular. Then the Ruby is also an all-court paddle that has just a bit more power on big swings than the double Black Diamond does. The big advantage of the Ruby is that it has a slightly softer feel off the face, but still retains the same, if not more power than the double Black Diamond, which again is likely due to the higher swing weight, giving it more plow through. So the Ruby takes elements of both the double Black Diamond and the Proline Energy S and puts it into one paddle that is quite a complete package. One thing I hope you guys will understand is that all 3 of these paddles fall into the same court category. They just lean one way or another on the spectrum. It's not like we're comparing control paddles versus power paddles. So you can expect that there's not going to be a massive difference. So overall, I think the Ruby is a fantastic paddle. It's not a game changer like the Gearbox Pro Power is, but it is something that I think a lot of people are going to like, and it's honestly a paddle that I could see replacing my double black diamond. I'll need more time to see how I would perform under pressure with the Ruby versus the double black diamond that I'm very comfortable with, but overall, I'm impressed with the paddle, and I think it's one that a lot of you are going to like. But anyways, that's all I've got for this review. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure to leave a comment down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.